how much hope and comfort comes from the fact that regardless of how evil life can be, we're not just a number, we're not just a body, we're not just a being, but the Lord of all creation literally knows our name. And when you think about all the different names there are and all the combinations and variations in between, He knows it all. And it's amazing to think that He loves us enough, each one, to care that much to know. Well, as I get started this morning, I want to take just a second to say thank you so much for your support, for your prayers, and for your thoughts for us. Christy and I, as we've been there almost 2 years now, 2 years in August, it's amazing to see God working, not just in our lives, but in the lives of our friends. The longer we're there, the more we realize that there is absolutely no way that we can do what we do on our own. It's through the gifts of great folks like you guys as you give through the cooperative program, and as that makes seminary actually affordable at the master's level. And it's also through the prayers and through the other donations from family and friends such as you to family and friends that we know in other places that God has sent at just the right time. We can't tell you how many times, not only in our life, but in the lives of our friends, that we've watched God provide exactly what was needed at exactly the right time, that it was exactly the right amount, that it was exactly the right prayer that was prayed, even though it was prayed from a half a state away. We cannot begin to tell you how thankful we are and how much that we appreciate the support that you guys give us. The topic that I want to talk to you and share with you about this morning, I want to go ahead and warn you ahead of time that this is more than just an academic exercise. I will warn you, I spent an entire semester in a class on this topic, but this is more than an academic exercise. What I'm going to share with you this morning is really born out of what God has been doing in my life, really since last December. The tough part about dealing with a topic like this is the simple fact that you cannot find a specific passage in Scripture that specifically gives specific answers for why such a thing happens. And as you can see, we're going to be talking about the topic of evil this morning. And as I just said, there are no specific passages that say, this is why, this is what's going on, it's all right. But what we have to do, we have to take those situations where we find a narrative, where we find an example of somebody who faces great evil and who overcomes it. We have to look at how God worked in their life. We have to look at how they handled it to see some principles that we can take for our own lives to understand evil and its existence. Not only that, we also need to find out who the God of creation is. We need to take a look at His characteristics, His attributes. We need to look at His love. We need to look at His justice. We need to look at His power. We need to look at things such as His sovereignty and His providence. And we need to understand that and put all of those things together so that we can have a biblical worldview on the topic of evil. Now, unfortunately, we don't have time this morning to take a look at all the different passages that we could glean from that. So we're going to take a look at just one particular passage this morning. You can go ahead and turn in your Scripture to Genesis chapter 50, and we're going to read in verse 15 here in just a little while. But as I backtrack just a little bit, I said this really is born out of my own testimony. You guys that have known me, some of you have known me really since I was probably my own children's age, as I did grow up in the community. It is no secret that God blessed me with a wonderful wife and with wonderful children. And it is no secret that one of my children was born with a birth defect. And it's no secret that I really didn't take that very well whenever that happened. What you probably don't realize, though, is how that affected my life. I like to think, whether it's true or not, I like to think that I kept a pretty good mask on and was able to convince people that things, were well and good. But as my wife and as hopefully, I don't even like to think about it, but as my children could possibly even testify, it did affect my relationship with them. It did affect my relationship with God. And it was through the testimony of a couple that we knew at church who lost an infant back in December. Through their testimony of how they handled it. Now, they didn't know what we were going through. They didn't know the anger and the bitterness I had. They didn't stop and say, well, now, Jared, this is how we're going to walk through this. You messed up. Pay attention. They just calmly, as God gave them the strength to take another step, lived out what I consider a biblical worldview in reaction to the evil that they were facing. And as I watched them do it, and as God, in his providence, allowed me to take a class on the problem of evil, God reconstructed my understanding of why things happen the way they do. And I hope this morning to be able to share with you through this passage, because I think we all struggle with the problem of evil. I think we all find ourselves in a situation where we have the why me syndrome, where we want to know, why am I bearing the brunt of this evil? Why is this happening to my family, to my children? Why is this happening to me? What sin did I commit? What did I do to deserve this? And those are all questions that I'm very familiar with asking. We also have the why me syndrome whenever we commit evil on someone else, when we commit sin and judgment comes and we have to face the consequences of our actions. I've been there too, and I know what it's like to think, God, this can't really be fair for what I did in this particular situation. So in this passage today, we're going to take a look at the two reasons why we face the why me syndrome. We're going to take a look at sin and its consequences, and then we're going to take a look at that evil that happens that just seems almost random, that just doesn't seem to have an explanation, that just seems to say, is God really in control? And we're going to take a look and find out some very awesome answers this morning. Before we get to that passage, though, I need to make sure we're all on the same page on the history of this. For those who are familiar with the book of Genesis, and who are familiar especially with the latter chapters, we find that it is all about Joseph and about what God is doing in his life. And when we're first introduced to Joseph, we find him in chapter 37 at about the age of 17, as a teenager who really had a problem with tattling. You know, he was just one of those guys that you probably enjoyed to hate because he was going to tattle on you if you did anything wrong. And in fact, we find him tattling on the brothers of his who were born to his father's concubines. And we also see in that introduction that the brothers did not like Joseph. Number one, because he was a tattletale, but number two, probably even more so because he was his father's favorite son. He was the firstborn son of the wife that he loved. And so he treated him with a favoritism that far outshone what he did to the rest of the brothers. It went so far as to get a coat of excessing beauty, as a coat of many colors, as we describe it today. And it was a thorn in the side of the brothers as they saw it. They were reminded how much their father prized and valued him. Now, the brothers, through all of this, their anger built, their anger swelled, and it got so bad to one day, especially after Joseph had dreams and had maybe even kind of in a nanny-boo-boo sense told his brothers, listen, these dreams, it looks like you guys are going to be bowing down to me at some point in the future. They didn't like that, and so later on, as they're watching the flocks and as Jacob sent Joseph out to watch and to check on him to see what's going on, they decided they were going to kill him. They decided they were going to put an end to this. They decided they had had enough. Fortunately, cooler heads prevailed. And by the time Joseph got there, they decided they were simply going to throw him into a pit. Now, they didn't just say, hey, Joseph, listen, we decided we're not going to kill you. In gratitude, would you please step down to this pit? I can imagine they probably beat the tar out of him, picked him up, and chucked him into this pit. Joseph was very aware that they wanted to commit him great bodily harm, and that they would have been very happy if he had ceased to exist. As I said, cooler heads prevailed. He wasn't killed. In fact, they decided, you know what? We don't want him anymore, and if he's going to die, we would rather somebody else commit the murder. As things would have it, a band of traders happened to be passing through, and they decided to sell him as a slave. He was taken into Egypt, and we know the story as it picks up from there, how he entered into Potiphar's house, and how even though God blessed his efforts there, he was stabbed in the back with a great vicious lie from Potiphar's wife as she accused him of making untoward advances with her. And we know that he was thrown into jail for a great many years because of this accusation. We know that he was forgotten there, even though he did everything he could to get out of jail as far as doing kind things to others. We see that about the age of 30, that he was finally pulled out of jail, and that he was put in charge, basically the second in command with everything that was going on in Egypt. Now, where we're going to pick up in Genesis 50, verse 15, Joseph's father has come. The famine has happened. It's actually come and it's gone. all of Joseph's relatives are living in the land of Egypt. Jacob has passed away, and the brothers have finally decided, listen, Dad was our safety net. He's not here anymore. Joseph's in a position he can do something about what we did to him. We need to get this taken care of. And that's where we pick up in Genesis chapter 50, verse 15 through 21. And it says, when Joseph's brothers saw that their father was dead, they said to one another, if Joseph is holding a grudge against us, he will certainly repay us for all the wrong that we caused him. And so they sent this message to Joseph. Before he died, your father gave a command. Say this to Joseph. Please forgive your brother's transgression and their sin, the wrong they caused you. Therefore, please forgive the transgression of the servants of the God of your father. Joseph wept when their message came to him. Then his brothers also came to him. They bowed down before him and they said, we are your slaves. But Joseph said to them, don't be afraid. Am I in the place of God? You planned evil against me, but God planned it for good, to bring about the present result, the survival of many people. Therefore, don't be afraid. I will take care of you and your little ones. And he comforted them and spoke kindly to them. Now, this sermon really has two major sections. And then the first thing that we want to deal with is the first thing that we come across in the passage is the brother's sin. And the first thing that we understand and that we discover about the brother's sin is that it caused a separation. Now, we know that that's true because we see that they feared retribution. When we see where they say, if Joseph is holding a grudge, some translations write it out as, what if? Now, in the Hebrew, it looks like that could be one of two kinds of statements. It could be conditional. Maybe he does, maybe he doesn't. It's a possibility, we don't know. It also could be taken as an emphatic statement where, listen, he's got to have a grudge against us. It's going to be bad. We got to do something about this. But either way, there was fear in their hearts, and they knew this was something that had to be taken care of. They feared what could happen. Now, the concept of retribution was common. They understood how that worked. The reap what you sow adage. We find that in 1 Samuel chapter 24, verses 16 through 19, where Saul is speaking to David, and he's almost broken in tears when he's saying, listen, I treated you horrible. You didn't take my life. And he realized the act of grace that happened when he didn't get what he deserved. We see that also in Isaiah 59, verse 18, where we see retribution as something that God is in charge of, that God will make sure that you reap what you sow. You're not going to get away with it for very long. We see in Genesis 42, as the brothers have come in to Joseph, they don't realize he's Joseph, and Joseph is testing them in the land of Egypt to see, where their hearts are, to see if his father's still alive, to see how his brother's doing. And they're being put through the ringer as they're being accused of stealing, as things are happening to the brothers. Simeon has to